Hi, we're here to give you an update of the state legislative session. Today is Wednesday, May 22nd. Session ended at midnight on May 20th, so we have the latest and greatest from what happened. The bills have not all been signed by the governor yet. We fully expect him to sign all the bills, so we don't anticipate any of the things that we've talked about today that will change. I'd like to start out first with talking about the state estate tax. In 2011, we passed legislation that allowed farms to qualify for an extra $4 million exemption from the state estate tax. The way the legislation was written, farms that were held in a family farm trust, an LLC, or an LLP did not qualify for the extra exemption. So we've worked on legislation to clarify that the last 2 years. This year we were successful. And those changes will be retroactive going back to June 30th of 2011. So right now it would be clear that qualified farm property for the extra exemption does include farms held in a family farm trust, an LLP, and an LLC. So this has been an important issue for us, and we had a lot of good support both with the Department of Revenue and the legislature. One of the other issues we talked a lot about during this session was a proposed increase in the water appropriations permit fee. And this is a fee that you need to get a water appropriations permit if you're going to drill a well that I believe pumps more than 4 or 5 million gallons a year. The current fee for ag irrigation is $140 per well. That's an average. The proposed increase would have more than doubled that. The average would have went up to somewhere around $330 a year. Also, currently there's a cap on that fee. This proposed fee would not have a cap, so you couldn't budget kind of the maximum risk that you would be looking at as far as a permit fee. This went away. There was extra appropriations from the state general fund that's going to be used for the DNR to do more research onto groundwater availability, sustainability. We support those efforts. We need to find out more what's happening with our groundwaters and aquifers, but that will be paid for by the general fund, not an increase in the permit fee. Another issue is overtime pay. Currently in Minnesota, the threshold for requiring overtime pay is 48 hours. The minimum wage legislation that was introduced dropped that to 40 hours. We were successful in keeping the 48-hour threshold in the bill that passed the Senate. The House dropped the 48 hours to 40 hours, but we had an exemption for ag workers in the House bill. As being part of the minimum wage bill, the House raised the minimum wage somewhere over $9 an hour. The Senate only went to about $7.50, I believe. So the House and the Senate couldn't come together on that number. Therefore, the legislation didn't go forward, but we do expect that that is one of the issues that could come back for the next legislative session. County fair funding. There's two funding pots available for county fairs. One is with the Department of Ag that's been around quite a few years that county fairs can use for premium money. That's funded at the current level somewhere around $470,000 per year. Now the second part of the funding was additional funding for arts, preservation of the cultural heritage, some important functions that county fairs do. 2 years ago we were able to get funding from the Cultural Heritage Fund to fund for county fairs, grants to all county fairs, plus special grants that they could apply for doing different projects. And it was really interesting to watch all of the great projects that county fairs did to use this money. So this year we were able to get funding for the program, but it's actually coming from the Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Growth and Research Initiative, the Agri Fund, and not coming from the Cultural Heritage Fund. And we have $1 million each year, so a total of $2 million, but that's a reduction from the funding in the past, which was at $2.8 million. So we're concerned about the reduction, but we're pleased, obviously, that we were able to get some funding to continue that program. It's been a good program. Another funding provision is the program that the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has that compensates livestock farmers if a wolf destroys or damages or cripples an animal. And that program's been around for a long time in the Department of Agriculture. It's actually been funded at $150,000 per year. This year the funding continues, but that fund drops to $100,000 a year, so a $50,000 per year decrease in the funding. Going along with the wolf issue, there was legislation introduced that would have placed a moratorium on wolf hunting and trapping. The Senate had one hearing on that. The House did not have any hearings. The moratorium did not pass, so we'll continue to have that hunting and trapping season in Minnesota, and I think that's one of the reasons that was considered when they dropped the funding for the compensation program. Hopefully the hunting and trapping season will help control the wolf population. Well, still to be determined. The one issue that came up right at the end of session that is not good news is that now you will be paying sales tax on labor on your farm machinery repair. This was as you remember, Governor Dayton came in with a great big expansion of the sales tax on business-to-business services that would have included legal, accounting, engineering, consulting, and all those things. He dropped that idea. At the end of the session, though, the Senate brought the idea back to expand some of the state sales tax. And the original language said that the repair and maintaining of commercial and industrial machinery would be subject to the state sales tax. We saw that language. We asked senators, would this apply to farm machinery? And we were told repeatedly that it would not. Well, the way the bill was written, and when you go through conference committees, the tax bill is about 300 pages. There's, I don't know, several hundred amendments that are offered, and then this all gets put together. We didn't see the final version of the bill until Sunday. And when you look at the way it's written, farm machinery does fall into this category. There's no specific exemption for farm machinery. There was a lot of scrambling on Monday, the last day of session, to fix this, because it clearly was the intent that this shouldn't be the case. Ran out of time. So we have a pledge from senators, and you may have heard this as they're going around, that they need to fix some of the little clinkers that got in the tax bill, and this is one of the big clinkers for farmers. So we have a commitment that they're going to fix this next year, and their advice to farmers was to make sure you keep track of all records of your sales tax cost, and they're going to try and figure out a way to credit you back or reimburse you for those next year. And this will be effective June 30th, 2013. It'll obviously probably be our priority issue from Farm Bureau's perspective for the next session. We have clear policy on it, and we'll keep working on it, but it's a message you need to communicate with your legislators as you talk to them over the summertime that we clearly don't support it, it shouldn't have happened, and it needs to get fixed. Another expansion of the state sales tax is on warehousing and storage services. Now in that language, it specifically exempts agricultural products. The issue we have, though, is we don't see a clear definition of agricultural products. Does that mean the grain, the livestock you produce? Does it also include your inputs? There was some concern about LP gas or grain storage, grain banks, feed stored for future use. The good news about this provision, it doesn't go into effect until March 31st of 2014. And we've heard from the Department of Revenue that they're going to be issuing clarifications about how these new taxes will work. And we have commitments again from the tax committee that they'll be revisiting this issue in 2014, and we'll have to see what they come up with for clarifications. Biofuel mandate. In Minnesota currently only ethanol can be blended with gasoline, and you voting delegates took a position that that should be expanded to include all biofuels. So currently we have what's called a state minimum ethanol content in gasoline. That's been changed to a minimum biofuel content in gasoline. So that means that the whole class of next generations of biofuels, we can now blend those into gasoline to meet some of those minimum requirements that we have. Those are some of the more key issues that we've been working on. And I really appreciate the opportunity to do the video update with you, but obviously it limits questions. So after you see this, if I didn't cover an issue you've been looking at or wondering about, please contact myself or any member of the public policy team. We're going to have, again, this year, conference call and webinars later on in June, and you'll be having more information about that very shortly. But looking forward to next session. So what are going to be some of the issues? For sure, food labeling of GMOs. In other words, labeling food if they contain GMO products. This bill was introduced both in the House and Senate. No hearings were held this session, so it's alive and well for next session. There was also legislation that was introduced that would restrict antibiotic use in animal agriculture. We know that's going to be discussed next year. A new issue that was introduced this year was a bill that would require licensing or certification for tile installers. And that bill did not have a hearing, but again, that's out there, and that's one we'll be, I think, addressing next year. Another big issue is who qualifies for the ag homestead classification. Senator Scully introduced a bill that basically said you need to own the land and occupy the land to qualify for the ag homestead classification. And this is, again, is a really big deal for farmers because the class rate for homesteaded property is 0.5, whereas the class rate for non-homesteaded property is 1, so it's double. And then his idea makes sense. The problem is, as we looked at it, there's a lot of different ownership structures out there. We had examples of a lady who still owned the farm. She moved to town, sold the farm site, just the farm site, to her son. Well, now, does that mean they won't qualify for the homestead on the land? And those were the issues that came up as we were discussing it. And we suggested to Senator Scully that we should wait this year on doing anything, and that we'll go back and talk to our membership and see how this would impact changes, and maybe there's a way we can write the language that it won't have a negative impact. I mean, he clearly stated, I don't want to raise property taxes on farmers, but we do have some folks that maybe shouldn't be qualifying for that homestead, so that's an issue we're going to be looking at. So I want to thank you for taking your time for this update, and again, questions or comments, please contact us, and I hope you have a good meeting. Thank you.